This evening I'm going to continue reading Chapter 3 of Transactionalism by Trevor J. Phillips, reading the sections on the knower and the known and skin-boundedness. The knower and the known. In an article written soon after the publication of Knowing and the Known, Arthur Bentley posed the question, in inquiries into knowledge, can we assume that man as the knower is a part of the world as it is known? Before attempting to answer, he called attention to the obscurities which virtually all the words comprising his sentence are capable of producing, pointing particularly to knower and parts. If the knower is taken in traditional psychic detachment, or if the part is taken to apply to the knower, even when he is naturalistically viewed, in a way that makes him a detachable component under some form of mechanistic or other interactional procedure, then the question posed is judged in advance and adjudged unfavorably. By the phrase traditional psychic detachment, Bentley was referring to what both he and Dewey had labeled self-action, which has already been defined as that stage of inquiry which establishes a knower in person, residing in, at, or near an organism to do the knowing. To posit such a knower, something must be available to know. But the knower and to be known find themselves in isolated realms, and a major question of epistemology is raised. How does a knower know? It is no accident that the word knower is absent from the title of Dewey and Bentley's joint work. It has already been made evident that the behavior of an organism was never taken by the authors as of the organism alone, or of the environment alone, but rather of the organic environmental situation. There is a definite continuity between the subject and the object, the knower and the known, as reflected in the term knowing known, preferred by transactionalists to knowledge. Knowing, in the sense here employed, springs originally from human experience within the natural world, and knowledge, far from being a separate and self-sufficing entity, is involved in the process by which life is sustained and evolved. As was implied in a previous section, there is no need for any dependency upon a supernatural mental faculty in the knower that comes into contact with a supernatural truth-giving being, or with some mysterious realm beyond the bounds of nature. It is germane at this juncture to quote an excerpt from an early essay by Dewey written in 1917. Its contribution to the present section of the study is self-evident. Of particular interest is the fact that it contains an early use by Dewey of the term transaction. The problem of knowledge, Überhaupt, exists because it is assumed that there is a knower in general, who is outside the world to be known, and who is defined in terms antithetical to the traits of the world. With analogous assumptions, we could invent and discuss a problem of digestion in general. All that would be required would be to conceive the stomach and food material as inhabiting different worlds. Such an assumption would leave on our hands the question of the possibility, extent, nature, and genuineness of any transaction between stomach and food. To the transactionalist, the process of knowing makes a difference not only to the known, but to the object known. For it is seen as a cognitive relation between the knower and the to be known. It is a transactional relation through which an individual imputes meaning to his world and then responds to that meaning which he himself has invested in or projected upon situations, events, and persons. To be sensitive to a stimulus, a necessary requisite for knowing, actually implies the subtle cooperation of the would-be knower with his to-be-known. It means, as Randall has made clear, that a genuine interaction occurs between organism and environment, which act together in cooperation. Such an interaction, a transaction, is a way of acting of the latter and a way of acting of the former. There is, however, a substantial qualifier. There are not two ways of acting. There is only one way, which is a way of cooperating, a way of interacting. Skin-boundedness. It has been stated both implicitly and explicitly that a basic presupposition of transactionalism is that what is known is directly concerned with the activity of the knower. They are twin aspects of common fact, the fact of knowing. To express it even more succinctly, the act of observing modifies that which is being observed. As Dewey and Bentley phrased it, since man as an organism has evolved among other organisms in an evolution called natural, we are willing, under hypothesis, to treat all of his behavings, including his most advanced knowings, as activities not of himself alone, nor even primarily his, but as processes of the full situation of organism environment, and to take this full situation as one which is before us within the knowings, as well as being the situation in which the knowings themselves arise. Both John Dewey and Arthur Bentley had, during their respective careers, questioned the notion that human behavior is an intradermal process. In his 1896 paper, The Reflex Arc Concept in Psychology, Dewey successfully challenged this example of physiological reductionism, and, as will be demonstrated in the following chapter, substituted an approach which at a later date was termed transdermal. Bentley, whose relatively recent article, The Human Skin, Philosophy's Last Line of Defense, was widely acclaimed, joined Dewey in the belief that man's anatomical skin can no longer be regarded as dominant over the full system. As early as 1910, Bentley also had come to view with skepticism the intradermal localization of psychological fact by psychologists and philosophers alike. However spatially isolated the individual appears at a crude glance, the more minutely he is examined, the more are his boundary lines found to melt into those of his environment, the more frequently are functions found which work through both individual and environment, so that it cannot be told where the one ceases and the other begins, leaving, by the way, products near the limits which can hardly be said to be either the one or the other. Taking his cue from Dewey, who in 1934 had written that no creature lives merely under its skin, Bentley became intrigued by the significance of the concept skin and its role in philosophical and psychological thought. The outcome was the article cited above, which was, Bentley openly admitted, indebted for its development to Peirce's earlier work, and specifically to that thinker's long search for a living as opposed to a static logic. In the article, Bentley expressed the view that advocates of the theory that the skin cuts off the body from the rest of the universe must necessarily subscribe to the belief that knowledge is a capacity, attribute, possession, or some other inner quality of a knower. To so believe, however, is to ignore the revolutionary developments which modern physiology has wrought. Pavlov is the pioneer here. It was he who saw that the cerebral activity could not be assigned to the cortex as a power or capacity. What he studied was a process directly involving phenomena outside the skin along with phenomena inside, so that the region in which the physiological event took place, its locus, was literally wider than any region enclosed by the skin. Bentley maintained that skin dominated every position the more traditionally oriented philosopher occupies, as well as every decision he makes. For the latter, the Newtonian concept of space-time and the skin-encompassed knower theory are correlates, and the birth of a dilemma is imminent. If the philosopher sticks to the knower in its old space and time, the only way he can get his knower to achieve its knowing in regions beyond the skin is through some form of magic, and the only path of escape he has ever found from the primitive magic is by way of verbal subtleties, which are themselves just magics of an upper caste. If, on the other hand, the philosopher discards the Newtonian scheme under the influence of modern physics, and if he discards the magic knower under the influence of modern cultural studies, then he will find his phenomena of inquiry developing a phase space, a system of their own, for their formulation, and his whole inquiry will pass beyond the range of official philosophical technique and fall fully within that of freely advancing science. Inner realms and outer realms are viewed with suspicion from the transactional orientation, for when the concept of human skin as separator is invoked, there is, warned Bentley, a technique of the past surviving into the present, and demonstrating that the inner knower it employs is a force, capacity, faculty, actor, or power belonging to that type of forces which competent sciences expel. Physics today wholly, biology to sufficient extent so that the outcome is already clear. 2. That no such force or actor has ever been observed directly, it being a phenomenon of ascription rather than description. 3. That once we have abandoned attribution to isolated inners of the sub-scientific type, we can attain no description that makes sense at all for actual human behaviors, lovings, hatings, buyings, votings, fightings, without observing and describing the behavioral activity as itself positively and directly transdermal. An aspect of the present discussion which indicates the functionality of the transdermal concept is the transactional sign process, which is used to describe the participation of the human being and lower organism in the knowing and behavioral processes. Dewey and Bentley employed sign to designate an indirection or action of organisms not found in physical or physiological processes. By way of illustration, they cited the findings of a zoologist, H.S. Jennings, who in 1906 reported a characteristic of sea urchins which differed significantly from that of any immediate, direct physical or chemical response. While the sea urchin tends to remain in dark places and light is apparently injurious to it, yet it responds to a sudden shadow falling upon it by pointing its spines in the direction from which the shadow comes. This action, Jennings continues, is defensive, serving to protect it from enemies that in approaching may have cast a shadow. The reaction is produced by the shadow, but it refers in its biological value to something behind the shadow. Sign is always to be understood, as it was by Peirce, as transactional sign process, and never as consisting of an outer or separate physical thing, nor yet a detached mental thing. Inner knowns and outer knowns, accoutrements of the skin-boundedness concept, are completely rejected by transactionalists as interactional or self-actional. To hold that signs are transactional in nature implies that they do not name items or characteristics of organisms alone, nor do they name items or characteristics of environments alone. In every case, they name the activity that occurs of both together. Dewey and Bentley recognized three levels of differentiation of signs: signal, name, and symbol. Signal is a transactional sign in the perceptive manipulative ranges, which has been graphically illustrated as follows. If a dog's bark scares a rabbit, the signal as here viewed is neither a bark in a world of its own, nor is it a dog as such, nor is it a specialized process of rabbit's nerve and brain, but always an aspect or phase of the situation seen in full. Of the two remaining levels of differentiation of signs, symbol, as in mathematics, is of little concern to the present discussion. Name, as in organized language, is of note, however, in that naming and named develop from signaling and are themselves transactional. What is the named is not detached or detachable environmental existence, but environment as presented in signaling behavior. Naming is thus seen as a form of knowing, with knowing itself a form of behavior. Naming does things, it states, and in order to state, it conjoins and disjoins. If, for example, the animal drinks, there must be liquid to drink. To name the drinking without providing for the drinker and the liquid drink is unprofitable, except as a tentative preliminary stage in research. Naming selects, discriminates, identifies, locates, orders, arranges, systematizes. In summary, it is clear that to embrace the transactional point of view is to eschew skin-boundedness, and to be particularly emphatic about the transdermal nature of human behavior. Inner percepts must be discredited as things, as must perceiving activities when regarded as powers of the organism within its own skin. When viewed transactionally, however, perceiving is the full space and time of the activity of the organism and environment in a given event. Finally, that which is projected as external to man's behavioral living is to be rejected as dependently known and named, and also that which is internal to it. The named is a behavioral transaction, a signaling or perceiving that requires the joint action of its two presumptive ends, roughly the intradermal and the extradermal, if it is to have any middle of factuality at all. What is named depends neither on a demand made by a thing upon an organism, nor by the identification of a separate independent organism of an outer thing. Bentley's recapitulation will suffice. We not only say that a knowing without its known, or a known without its knowing, is an incoherence, but that a knowing in naming that pretends to know and name something outside of or beyond all signaling or other organic environmental contact is equally an incoherence.